Hello everybody, I'm Kate Cass and welcome to our edition of Let's Talk About. Today, it's time once again to talk about Stitch Day. Some of you might be surprised to see a Stitch Day video this year, since I tend to only celebrate the Little Blue Monster special day every other year, ever since I started doing these in 2016. That was never really on purpose though, it just kinda happened. But I like spacing them out like that, so I kept doing it. But if you've been keeping up with these videos, you might also know I planned to make Stitch's 20th anniversary last year the grand finale to these celebrations by covering all the movies in 1 month. Then life stuff happened and I only had time to review the original movie. So I'm just gonna break the tradition and start reviewing the rest of these movies one at a time every Stitch Day. Plus I figured I should start catching up before that blitz-snacked live-action remake comes out and the requests start pouring in. So let's kick off Stitch Day this year by talking about the movie that officially made Lilo and Stitch a franchise. Like any Disney film that winds up being successful, it wasn't going to begin and end with just one movie. Just 14 months after Lilo and Stitch hit theaters, we got the direct-to-video sequel, Stitch the movie. Why that's the title they decided to give this, I have no idea. It became very confusing for Google later on. With our new Ohana settling into the regular routines of life on Earth, the difficulties of fitting in get put on hold when Gantu barges in and kidnaps Jumba, hired by Jumba's former business partner to retrieve Jumba's other experiments, all 625 of them. Stitch the movie falls into the Disney direct-to-video category of backdoor pilots, movies that would be about an hour long that would 1. Reintroduce the audience to the world and characters and how everyone is doing after Happily Ever After, and 2. Present how they can possibly stretch said universe's story into an ideally 65-episode TV show. A lot of times, these are really a stretch, even if most of the time the shows they spawn tend to be at least entertaining, at least in my opinion. I know Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure is a really good show, like insanely good, but I can't be the only one who watched those promos with the big shocking reveal that her hair had grown back that went...
Seriously?
With the development introduced in Stitch the movie, however, the potential is clear right from the start. Stitch himself was already a wildly popular character, so the reveal that Stitch was actually the latest in a line of prototype illegal genetic experiments was just ripe with possibilities. Most of which I already went over in my review of Lilo and Stitch series, so talking about this glorified pilot is going to be kind of difficult without repeating myself, but I'll try my best. Let's start with the reintroduction of our unconventional family, with a cute opening that reacquaints us with everyone and familiarizes us with the new status quo. Stitch, Jumba, and Pleakley are fully integrated into Lilo and Nani's family now. Stitch is Lilo's best friend as she teaches him more about life on Earth, and Nani trusts Pleakley enough to at least supervise at home so she can have some kind of social life. It's not something she's entirely comfortable with, but the fact that she has the luxury to entertain that notion now says a lot about how much things have changed. The function of this movie is to be the pilot for a TV series, but as a sequel to the original movie, it's kind of amazing how easily this world that was supposed to be for a self-contained film transitioned to fit the needs of a continuing series. In the short time between films, this family went from being broken and trying the best they could to stay together against the odds, to growing larger and, in the long run, much better off than they were before, but much more unconventional. They accept each other, but being accepted by others is proving more difficult. Stitch in particular is disheartened by how much of an outcast he still is. For how much he's changed and how much he wants to be a part of life on Earth, it's not that easy. And as great as it is to be surrounded by people who love you for who you are, it is tough to not take it personally when others aren't as accepting. But while these more domestic obstacles are fun to watch and give the franchise most of its unique charm, from this point on, the series would lean more on the alien side of things rather than the human side, because you can make more fantastical family entertainment out of that. Surprisingly though, for a series that would lean much more into its sci-fi roots, I'm pretty sure this movie has one of the very few battles in space in the original franchise, against former Captain Gantu, who is on a new mission now. After his failure to capture Stitch got him fired at the end of the first movie, he needed to find work somewhere else, stumbling into working for Jumba's former partner, we'll get to that, to obtain, you guessed it, the other 625 experiments, which Gantu just blurts out. That was kind of a shame. I think it would have been way better if they saved the reveal of what Jumba was hiding for when the rest of the family figured it out. Also, Jumba just has all of his former experiments with him, like in a weird looking capsule under his bed, like it's this neglected Pokemon card collection. I do really like how the experiments have been stored all this time, as I'll go more into in a second, but how Jumbo smuggled the casing to Earth after his arrest and spontaneous banishment is anyone's guess. I mean, I guess it could have been on a ship, but actually that sounds reasonable. Let's move on. Like I said at the beginning, when Jumba is not willing to cooperate, he's kidnapped by Gantu and taken prisoner by his former business partner.
Gantu? But he's so little.
Our proper introduction to Dr. Jacques von Hamsterwheel.
Hamsterwheel! It is Hamsterwheel!
Okay, I promise I'm not going to do that every time I mention Hamsterwheel, but I had to get at least one in there. At first, Hamsterwheel seems like a typical case that happens when a story goes on and there's even the slightest sliver of a character's past we don't know about. Turns out that Jumba didn't work alone, but had a shady partner financing all of his work, meaning Hamsterwheel now feels he's entitled to ownership of all of Jumba's work. A conflict that has no real-world applicability, I'm sure. Also, where he got the finances to fund over 600 illegal genetic experiments, I have no idea. Maybe he was mining cryptocurrency or something, inventing gerbil coin. That's all fine and dandy though. Jumba's life as an evil scientist before Stitch's creation was vague enough that everything we're learning in this movie could slot into his past perfectly fine. Although personally, I'd like to know the story behind this remark.
Hamsterwheel is alive?
Quit telling everyone I'm dead!
But the history behind Hamsterwheel is in fact an iceberg that goes much deeper in this franchise than most might realize. Okay, here we go. You may already be aware of this little bit of trivia, that at the beginning of Lilo and Stitch, when the Grand Councilwoman and Pleakley are visiting Jumba in prison, you can see an alien in one of the other cells that bears a striking resemblance to Hamsterwheel. This has led fans to believe that this is the same character, or at the very least, they are both part of the same species. Personally, I was willing to believe that it was Hamsterwheel, even if it wasn't intended to be. It's certainly plausible that he could have escaped in the gap between movies. It wouldn't be the last time he'd escaped prison, and might even explain why Jumba thought Hamsterwheel was dead. But then, when I was doing more research on Hamsterwheel, I found out that he has another lookalike in this franchise. In the PlayStation 2 game, Experiment 626, which takes place before the events of the first movie, Stitch and Jumba face off against a supposed rival of his, Dr. Habit-Rail. Its canonicity is sketchy at best, but I find it so hilarious that two members of this one alien species have some sort of grudge against Jumba. At the end of the day, this was likely just the different production crews reusing assets from the first movie that didn't get much attention, and they didn't realize that one of those uses would go on to become pretty much the main villain of the franchise. But that's also hilarious because out of all of the alien designs they could have ripped from the original movie to make a new character, they somehow both chose this. Of course, because this is the pilot for the Lilo and Stitch TV series, Hamsterwheel isn't the only thing introduced here. The most significant introduction is the reveal of the other 625 experiments Jumba created. Now, I talked a lot about the experiments as a concept and how I think they're a brilliant premise for a Lilo and Stitch TV show in my review of said TV show, so I won't dwell on that concept too much here. Here, I'm going to keep things specifically centered around the introduction of them and the couple of experiments we meet in this first adventure. First of all, I can only imagine how difficult it was to figure out how to have hundreds of illegal genetic experiments similar to Stitch just pop up out of thin air and drop them onto Earth. Figuring out how to do that must have been a chore, but the solution they came up with is really clever. The mystery box style reveal of having each experiment dehydrated into portable capsule-like pods is an elegant way to get them all to Earth and to scatter them around the island by the end of the film without Hawaii exploding into planet-wide panic. There was always this little moment of anticipation as an experiment was activated, wondering what it would look like and what it would do. Right from the very first time we see it happen, as Stitch and Lilo activate one they think can help them rescue Jumba. Activating Experiment 221, played by Man of a Thousand Voices Frank Welker doing an impression of Chris Sanders' Stitch voice if it was raised 2 octaves. That was so convincing that I didn't even realize it wasn't Sanders until recently. This seems like a good plan, except... Oh right, they're all evil. Man, I can only imagine what kind of havoc Stitch would have unleashed if he activated all of them like he intended. 221, later named Sparky, was a great choice to introduce us to the other experiments. He has similar design features to Stitch, but other elements that are unique to him. Most notably, that his body can transform into a ghost-like lightning bolt to get deep into electronics and cause a power surge. He's familiar in look and attitude, but unique in his primary function, introducing the audience to the idea that each experiment will specialize in something. Well, most of them will anyway. Which brings me to the other experiment activated in this movie, Experiment 625, who is supposedly a prototype of 626 and has all of Stitch's powers. And before you can even ask why Jumba had to build Stitch when he already had an experiment that could do everything he could, the movie shows us why.
Funny thing, 625 has all powers of 626. Unfortunately, is also a lazy coward. But makes great sandwiches.
625 doesn't do much in the movie aside from this. This is mostly to introduce him as a comic relief sidekick for Gantu in the TV show, but I will say that he does a good job at showing how the experiments can be very different from each other, and that not all of them were successes. Also, Rob Paulsen's voice acting as 625 may be one of his most underrated roles. That dry delivery and a wannabe New York accent was always amusing. I still love it to this day. As the story goes on, it becomes about Lilo and Stitch deciding what to do about Sparky when Hamsterville demands all of Jumper's experiments in exchange for his safe return. There are a couple of character things I want to bring up with this plot real quick. First off, I love Nani's reaction and response. Nani has her hands full much more than the first movie, because she has an even more ridiculous situation than before, but she still does the best she can to help Lilo, going out of her way to get in touch with people who can help save Jumba. Nani would become significantly less present in the franchise going forward, so trust me when I say that this little bit goes a long way. Who she gets in contact with to help is none other than Cobra. This is probably my favorite appearance by Cobra in the franchise. He's intimidating but trusting, diplomatic yet caring. This is the only time where Cobra's status as a former CIA agent plays a significant role in the story, as well as his continued contact with the Grand Councilwoman and other aliens, and it's really cool to get to see him in these kinds of scenarios. It really is a shame they didn't do it more. So far, I've been going over a lot of the fun, exciting, and creative things this movie does as a continuation of the original film. As a new chapter in the story, it's pretty solid. However, it ain't perfect. It's still a Disney direct-to-video sequel, so there's gonna be cracks in the foundation no matter how sturdy it tries to look. For one, the pace is rough. Everything seems to move a bit too slowly, and exchanges between characters have a lot of awkward beats in between them. Not only that, but certain sequences go on for way too long to the point that they can really drag. For example, Lilo and Stitch have a fun montage of searching the island for Sparky, except for the fact that it just keeps going because they need to fill this hour somehow. But the place where the slow pacing can really be felt is in the very first scene of the movie, when Gantu boards Hamsterville's ship. From the moment the Disney logo cuts away to when Gantu first appears on screen, this scene goes on for 45 seconds. If this was a big budget film, this wouldn't be a problem, but in a 58-minute direct-to-video family film, you really feel every second as it drags by. Actually, I take it back. This doesn't work in feature films either. It was boring in the first Star Trek movie, it was a slog in Spaceballs, and it persists here. This kind of opening in general is just not a great first impression. The voice acting seems to have the same problem. Performance-wise, it's not bad. It's the same amazing cast reprising all their roles, and this group rarely fails. But for some reason in this movie, the delivery can sound stilted and incoherent. It's much slower, and everyone even sounds a little deeper than they usually do. Well, except for Gantu, but to be fair, I don't think you could get a deeper voice than what Kevin Michael Richardson naturally offers. It can even make it tough to make out the dialogue sometimes. This might be a problem with direction, because none of the other movies or the TV show have this problem. Then again, a lot of the creative team behind this movie worked on a bunch of other Lilo and Stitch projects, so I don't really know what happened here. I've heard that sometimes voice performances are sped up slightly to make it sound more natural and conversational, and if that's the case, I have to wonder if someone just forgot to do that here. On a more positive note, the animation is pretty good. It's not movie quality, obviously, but pretty solid given what this is. This is when Disney Toon Studio was really upping their game, and it shows. The backgrounds are on par with the movie, the CGI is only noticeable and not distracting, and the characters stay on model, which, trust me, for these direct-to-video movies, was not often guaranteed. And in hindsight, it is fun to see Stitch the movie introduce things that would become running gags in the TV show. Stitch's preference for coconut cake and coffee, because he ate both ones in the movie and they're following fanfiction rules, I guess. People getting Hamsterville's name wrong, politically indulging more in female disguises and getting Earth culture hilariously wrong, and 625 single-mindedness surrounding sandwiches. Plus the fun yet ridiculous ways plotlines are resolved sometimes. Like how Pligley managed to find Jumba by just calling Hamsterville's prison cell up in the intergalactic phone book. And by the way, just in case you were born after this movie came out, a phone book is kind of like the contacts list on your phone, but it listed all the phone numbers of everyone in your county in a bunch of auto parts stores, and was mostly used to help kids reach kitchen cabinets. Like always with this franchise though, what really gives this movie its charm and its heart is the characters. And this is an interesting case because this was the first story they were in after the original film. Like I've been saying, there's a nice evolution to the relationships as they prepare them for the TV series based on attributes from the first movie. Like how Stitch reinforced the philosophy of Ohana that Lilo taught him when he realizes that the other experiments are an extended family to him, his cousins. When they're in danger of being turned over to Hamsterville, he wants to protect them. Same goes for Lilo. A lot of people complain that Lilo isn't as weird as she used to be in these continuations. I get how people would think that way, but I also think they're missing the fact that this is character development. Lilo's weird interests didn't go away, they're just not the center of her world anymore because with Stitch, she has a more productive, loving outlet. How Lilo matured in the first movie has become a central part of her character as she is once again understanding of the unconventional, and is ready to be their voice when no one else will. Jumba is in a similar place of coming into a better version of himself that would persist throughout the rest of the series. In the original movie, Jumba had no attachment to Stitch beyond being an accomplishment of his own hard work. Even when he helps him, it seems to be through a reluctant understanding. And if you consider the anime canon, then you find out that Jumba was planning to simply sell all the other experiments off as if they were assets and not living creatures. Despite proclaiming himself as an evil genius, Jumba never really seemed like the type of guy interested in conquering or ruling a planet. He just got a thrill out of inventing things that could assist in those kinds of goals. Possibly for profit, more likely for his own satisfaction. Slowly but surely though, on this tiny rock in space, he unknowingly finds something more rewarding. After everything they went through to get him back, Jumba starts to consider this little ragtag group of misfits his family. It's honestly really sweet. On the opposite end, you have Gantu. Back in the first movie, Gantu was antagonistic, but he wasn't a bad guy. I mean, you could argue that implying Stitch could eat Lilo as a snack is pretty despicable, but that could be more chalked up to intergalactic ignorance than anything outright malicious. But the fact that he didn't learn anything and kept the same narrow mindset is why he was the only one who was punished, being stripped of his title and position. So now he's gotta earn a living somehow and turn Hamsterville. So while he's willing to do downright criminal things to get by, he's not on the level of cartoon despicable that Hamsterville is yet. Demonstrated in one of the most underrated exchanges in the entire film.
Hang that up. No, slam it!
Oh, sorry.
He's not as experienced at being a bad guy yet. Gantu is stoic and obedient, if somewhat despondent in this new job, while Hamsterville is a hot-headed furball with a massive Napoleon complex and just enough external force to back up his threats. This villain dynamic just has such a great energy to it. Hamsterville acts maniacal and vengeful the entire time, meanwhile Gantu is standing in the corner like, I just work here. It's so good. There's a reason this was a foundation for a TV show. It works so well that you could watch it for that long. My favorite temperamental moment from Hamsterville in this movie is when he's handed over hundreds of lethal genetic abominations and gets angry when one is missing. I mean, if I were him, I'd figure out which one was missing before I got my tail in a knot. Because I think you can conquer the universe without the one who takes bad photos of people. But thanks to Lilo and Stitch, he won't get the chance. Despite Hamsterville's best efforts, and with the help of the newly reformed Sparky, the pair are able to pull off their first heroic venture together, through Lilo's bravery and Stitch's strength. We knew that Lilo was an unconventional and accepting girl, but here we see how brave she can be, especially with Stitch by her side, and when creatures she considers family are in need of help. This is a life-threatening situation with incomprehensible circumstances, and she's 7 years old, at most. That is one strong little Earth girl. And rewatching these movies, I appreciate that they never really nerfed Stitch's powers. He's never unrealistically weak for the sake of drama. He's always strong and agile, and any disadvantages come from proper containing methods or just being outmaneuvered. That's not always easy for writers to balance, especially for a character as strong as Stitch is. Together, they're able to save Stitch's cousins, but only by releasing them while on a spaceship, meaning the experiment pods are now scattered across Kauai. The circumstances that lead to this happening are believable, and it's a pretty good excuse to set up the conflict for the TV show. It also takes advantage of the Hawaiian setting again. As we talked about in the last video, it already played a major part in the story in forging its own unique identity next to the rest of Disney's catalog. Now they're utilizing that location with the fact that the other experiments are activated by getting wet. And as Pleakley points out, that's a real problem in Hawaii.
625 experiment pods activated by water raining down on one of the wettest spots on Earth?
Did I mention Plickly does a good job carrying the exposition in this movie while Jumbo's away? It's informative and funny all at the same time. The last essential element for this movie to set up going into the TV show is what to do with all these new experiments. They can't stay with them, Nani's got enough mouths to feed, so they take Sparky to a decommissioned lighthouse. Something big enough for Sparky to create giant surges of electricity that can take it without blowing up. It's another sweet moment where a lost little alien has found somewhere they can be happy. Once again, the Grand Councilwoman recognizes the positive effect of these reformations. So instead of evacuating the planet to destroy the loose experiments, yeah, I would have loved to have seen how that conversation would have gone, she puts forth the mission statement for Lilo and Stitch the series. For Lilo and Stitch to retrieve all of Jumbo's experiments, change them from bad to good, and find the one true place where they belong. Putting the responsibility of reforming over 600 lethal genetic experiments on a 7-year-old girl and her pet fugitive alien, which is a better idea than it sounds. And thus, a new and out-of-the-world adventure begins. Overall, Stitch the movie is probably the lightest and least polished of the Lilo and Stitch movies, but it does what it's meant to do really well. Re-establish the cast of newly beloved characters, set up the expanded world they inhabit, and present the premise of the upcoming TV show in a way that will convince kids to tune in. All I can say is, it certainly worked for me. Fun fact, this was my introduction to the Lilo and Stitch universe, and even if there were some references that went over my head, it's certainly not a bad intro. I don't know if that was the case for anyone but me, but I had no trouble picking up who everyone was and what their situations were. The characters have developed fun new dynamics, the new characters introduced are appealing, the premise is probably the best one out of these television continuations of classic Disney films, and while the production and writing can be rough in spots, it doesn't make for an unpleasant experience, just a slightly less polished one than the first film, but that's to be expected. As basically a glorified pilot to get kids hyped up for Lilo and Stitch the series, it definitely did its job. In fact, the VHS, and I think the DVD, even came with this little insert previewing the other experiments you could expect to see in the first 30 or so episodes of the show.
Designed for one thing, to kick booty.
And while I wish they didn't spoil Experiment 627 early, I remember being really excited for the premiere of Lilo and Stitch the series. As a 10-year-old kid who was already enamored with monster collecting series and was about to have a lot of sick days from school, I was in for the ride. Stitch the movie, while nothing remarkable, was the first success that elevated Lilo and Stitch from the runaway success of the Disney experimental era to one of their flagship franchises. And I'm so glad I gave it a try way back when, because at the end of the day, without it, June 26 wouldn't have become as important a date to me as it has. Thanks for watching, everyone. Definitely let me know what you thought of this movie in the comments below. That's why the series is called Let's Talk About. I want to give a very special thanks to my patrons who help support my content, including Chelsea A. Crandall, Dave L. Sproul, Hawk Hero, Jinx Productions, and Wait in the Wings. If you'd like to join these fine people in supporting my content while getting cool exclusive perks, you can check out my Patreon page at the link in the description, as well as my other social media if you'd like to check out any of those. Thank you so much again for watching, and until next time, aloha!